Hello and welcome to this video on genetically modified crops. GMO crops are one of the more readily maligned organisms, but what may surprise you is how few exist, what they are, and what they are used for. The process of making GMO food is one covered by controversy that stems from misinformation, which this video will try to correct. Let's begin by defining a GMO. Most organisms carry traits from others. This even includes humans, as it is thought mitochondria were once independent organisms, caught up in our cells and later incorporated. But this was back when humans were single-celled organisms. Coming forward many millennia, we have gene transfer between Neanderthals and other hominids. More recently, or at least in the last few thousand years, it is seen in fungi and bacteria, with the example organism being yeast. Even today, we are seeing examples of gene transfer. This can be observed with the recent spate of E. coli that produced the sugar toxin, something most commonly associated with the Shigella bacterium, and a trait that E. coli has acquired. In some cases, this process of gene transfer has partially been facilitated by selective breeding of plant and animal species, like wheat. Even with that in mind, sharing genes is the norm amongst most species, rather than an exception. For this video, let's assume a naturalistic definition of gene modification does not apply, which rules out most of these options. We can also rule out nuclear gardening, as it is not gene-specific or necessarily a controlled mutation. This largely leaves the artificial movement of genes between species, or removing them from one species. For this video, we can summarily divide these between CRISPR, plasmid vector, and particle gun methods of creating GMOs. They all do the same job, but via different mechanisms. Plasmids are well suited to single cells, as the carrier passes the cell membrane, then the nuclear envelope, and becomes part of the cell's genome, where the gene is expressed. CRISPR works by entering the nuclear envelope and targeting a specific gene that it matches to and then replaces. This can either change the function, purpose, or even viability of the target gene. You will find a link to videos on these two concepts in the top right, and further details in the description box below. The alternative to these two methods is called the particle gun method. This involves the use of metal particles coated with the desired gene. These are fired at a collection of cells and physically, rather than chemically or biologically, penetrate the nuclear envelope. This inserts the desired gene with brute force, but it can be more efficient. All of this sounds rather unnatural, which may be why anti-GMO pundits claim that the genes used in the creation of them involve fish DNA, that they make plants sterile, or that it is an unsafe technology that transfers the genes into humans somehow. The first and simplest of these is that if GMO food could transfer genes horizontally into humans, so would most food. This owes to how we digest food and how GMOs are made. The GI tract is very destructive, whilst gene transformations require highly controlled environments. The process of digestion fundamentally and critically ruins the pathways used for most genetic transformations. This means that if the genes in the food were to be transferred into a human, it would use a pathway common to conventional crops. Second is safety, and you need to consider thousands of years of food modification has been safe for these people, but use a strategic and controlled method with proven results, and suddenly it is dangerous. Remember, nothing is 100% safe, even food. As for sterility, this is a byproduct of many breeding programs, even conventional programs, and it is not universally true of GMO crops. The reality is, most farmers choose to use new seed, as the progeny from recycled seed can have throwbacks to undesirable elements, such as unwanted genes, mutations, and other problems. Buying new seed is simply a practical way to get better yields, sure results, and economical gain. Finally, cross-species transfer of genes as a means of modifying them. The fish protein thing is simply nonsense. It is largely now used as a teaching aid, and the exact example involves green fluorescent protein from jellyfish. This is put into cells such as bacteria to make them glow under UV light. A neat lab demonstration of GMO tech, but not particularly practical for when you are trying to produce a crop. In crops, they remove or alter genes, rather than take whole new genes from other species. There are exceptions that will be discussed later. There are two primary arms of GMO crops, these being those intended to make them resistant to herbicides, and those that are intended to make them resistant to pests or pesticides. The more common means of modifying crops are to remove genes susceptible to the effects of specific herbicides, such as glyphosate. This works by substituting a functioning version of the same gene from Agrobacterium that is insensitive to glyphosate. Note that they have not changed the function of the gene, but only the particular coding for it. This is much like replacing a piston in an engine with a higher capacity one. The car, and in this case genetic pathway, remain the same despite the change in a single isolated element. There are only 9 crops that have been approved in the United States of America where their status does not legally need to be disclosed, but there are 11 available worldwide, especially in countries where labeling of GMOs is required. This is what distinguishes GMO crops from conventional crop development. It is the targeted transformation of genes, which this image encapsulates. You may wonder what reason you would have to want to create a GMO, and the answer is relatively simple. Better crops, quicker and easier. Take the Great Famine of Ireland between 1845 and 1849. It caused the death of up to a quarter of Ireland's population at the time, and had effects that carried on for over a century. It was caused by heavy monoculture use and the potato blight. By growing one crop extensively and to the exclusion of others, an opportunistic fungus took hold and spread. This led to most potato crops becoming infected and producing meager yields, which in turn reduced future yields. If either crop variation or a resistant variety was used, it could have been prevented. In Ireland, neither option existed, as the potato was a staple crop, like wheat and rice in other countries, and resistant crops were not yet available. In relatively recent years, a similar problem occurred with bananas. At the start of the 20th century, bananas were going bananas, as they were exported en masse. People loved the fruit. The taste of bananas suddenly changed in the mid-20th century because of an outbreak. This was Fusarium oxysporum cubense, a fungus which predates on the banana tree. This led to whole plantations simply dying off and ruining the crop's future. One man kept the banana going, William Cavendish, the Duke of Devonshire, who had a private banana collection. He had been growing these since they were brought in from Mauritius in 1834. One of the bananas in this collection had the distinction of being seedless, and another quirk of it was that it was also resistant to the fungal outbreak. This meant the Cavendish banana was effectively immune. We now know this was due to the genetic diversity of the banana. Unfortunately, this may be happening again with the Cavendish, and we have no noble to ride in and save the banana this time. This is where GMOs come in. But it is not just used with threats to crops. It is used to improve yields, such as the recent superfast rice, or to support diet deficiencies, like the vitamin A fortified golden rice. Finally, there is efficiency, such as that seen with Bt cotton and Roundup ready crops. Both of these help with crop pests. In the case of Bt cotton, it produces its own pesticide, which reduces the impact of its primary predator, bollworm. Meanwhile, Roundup ready crops are not killed when exposed to glyphosate. This means you can sow your field, allow it to start growing, and then spray the field once with glyphosate and get a relatively full yield, because the non-weed crops survived. Both of these improve yields, reduce running costs, and are less labor intensive, which makes production cheaper and lowers food prices. The 9 standard GMO crops that have been created and approved are corn, soybeans, cotton, canola, alfalfa, sugar beets, papaya, squash, Arctic apple, innate potatoes, and if you stretch the definition of crop, it includes aqua bounty salmon. Corn, soybeans, cotton, canola, sugar beet, and alfalfa are primarily developed with resistance to herbicides, drought, and specific pests. Meanwhile, summer squash and papaya are disease resistant, like the Cavendish bananas. Potatoes are modified to be blight resistant and more resilient to rough treatment, and apples do not turn brown. As a sample of their use, 5 of these GMOs are used for human food, 6 for animal feed, 1 for fiber, and another cooking oil. The use of GMO corn alone has an average increase to total yields of 22%. Exceptions to these 9 include the recent production of an Ebola vaccine from tobacco plants, and in a similar vein, you have Bt corn, which uses an endotoxin that targets the gut lining of bugs that normally eat corn or cotton, otherwise damaging it. Insecticide use on corn farms declined from 0.21 pounds per an acre in 1995 to 0.02 pounds in 2010, a reduction to nearly 10% of the pre-GMO rate of application. This secondary benefit and the use of GMO crops is why it has been tested repeatedly and thoroughly for problems. The most commonly expressed concerns are about unwanted changes in nutritional content, the creation of allergens, and that GMOs may have a toxic effect on the body. Of these, unintended allergens have been identified twice, and these lines were never brought to market. Those lines, of course, being soybeans expressing Brazil nut protein and potatoes expressing fish proteins. They are the only known examples of GMO products creating problems. Even Bt varieties are safe. They use a toxin that is safe to humans because it targets an insect-specific and opportunistic thing, this being the lining of their gut. Rather than see these things as success in proving the safety and efficacy of GMOs by identifying allergens, the very discovery is seen as a problem. Imagine if crops excluded from this list because they don't fit into one of the 3 current methodologies are viewed in the same light. Eggs, peanuts, soybeans, and more. These would be shunned for the same reasons that the GMOs are currently seen as an evil. In contrast, the wider adoption of GMO crops, especially in Africa and Asian countries, is believed to be the impetus that will spur greater technology, increasing food supply and security, more so in areas where food security is a rising concern due to climate change. All of this does not prove that GMO food is safe, only that nothing on the market or in the pipeline to the market will be an obvious or immediate danger. Asking for evidence that GMOs are safe is like asking for evidence that pears do not cause autism. All you can say is that it does not have an obvious risk of causing deleterious or unwanted effects. This is a statement true of any food. This rant by David Mitchell summarizes the problem of seeing GMOs as a new development in food, where it really is just a refinement of existing procedures that have been used for millennia.
I'm off it. No, well, you shouldn't feed humans bread and milk.
No, not really.
What do you mean, not really? Well, it's absolutely demonstrably fine.
No, it's not very good for you.
Well, it's fine.
Bread and butter
We've been drinking milk and eating bread for ages. Why is it suddenly a massive problem? Oh, yeah. No, actually, we're supposed to live till we're 250. But no, we've been eating all this poisonous bread and milk all the time. We can barely limp past 98. It's ridiculous. Of course we're supposed to eat bread and milk.
This is contrasted by the incompatible actions of groups opposed to GMOs. They decry the use of herbicides like glyphosate. Meanwhile, the GMO crops that reduce the need for herbicides are shunned by them. This in turn exposes these people to what they view as the greater evil of big agricultural chemical companies. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it useful, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.